We're delighted to resume the program, and we're so honored to be joined by such a distinguished group of leaders from public policy, education, and business. I'm going to let our chair do the introductions, but I cannot tell you, Mona Locke, how grateful I am that you are here. Mona has become a dear friend over the past few years, and she and Ambassador Locke have been true champions for closer U.S.-China relations, for greater educational exchange, and in particular for the 100,000 strong effort. And you also saw the news that Ambassador Locke is stepping down, and we are just so grateful for his service, and Mona, for yours as well, and thank you very much. This session is really designed to ground the work of the 100,000 Strong Foundation in the overall strategic and economic relationship between the United States. These are intertwined. We can't look at our education efforts without looking at what we're doing on the economic and foreign policy side, and we bring these experts to talk about that today. So thank you.
Thank you, Carola, and welcome to the afternoon session. You've been such an amazing audience, and a special thanks to the students again for coming up and sharing. And also, I'd just like to say a brief thank you to Carola McGifford and 100,000 Strong and the staff, because I thought they've done a wonderful job. So we're all here because we either already believe in this bilateral strategic relationship between U.S. and China, or we're saying, what the heck? Why? So as Carola said, I think in the materials I'm Komen, Puget Sound, or Susan G. Komen, but really my other hat is that I am married to U.S. Ambassador to China, Gary Locke, and we spent 2 amazing years, and he 2.5 in Beijing, and it was such an honor and privilege to serve the people of the United States. But a little bit, when the students were talking about a foot in each culture, we faced a little bit of the same, being Chinese American, going to China, and the Chinese not understanding, why don't you speak Chinese? And then my 6-year-old daughter at the time, after 2 months of being there, she came home and she had refused to learn Chinese. No, Mom, I'm not going to learn. She came home one day and said, look at me, do I look Chinese to you? And I thought, that's an interesting dilemma. So then, in the reverse side, when the children and I moved back this past summer so that my eldest 2 high schoolers could actually have a home base in the United States. But I realized that when I moved back and people said, oh, you're international. I said, yeah, I moved back. And they said, where? And I said, China. And they said, oh, you're Chinese. And I said, I'm American. So it's been an interesting, amazing experience to actually have 1 foot in each culture and really learn about the Chinese and my ancestors, because I'm 2nd generation. But when the 2 kids were there, they were in international schools. And the amazing thing is, not only did they interact and meet Chinese children, but also international kids from every country around the world. And what's interesting to me is that these are children whose parents are representing businesses who are investing in China. And what has sparked this phenomenon and interest in investment in China? You know, how are the economies between our 2 countries interrelated and interdependent? And what are some of the key issues critical to the success in this relationship? And that's why we're here today with this distinguished panel that I'd like to introduce. First of all, on my right, Danny Russell, or would you like to go by Daniel?
Danny is fine.
Danny Russell. Actually, I'll call him Assistant Secretary. So the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and he's a career member of the Foreign Service. Prior to his appointment as an Assistant Secretary this year, Mr. Russell served at the White House as a Special Assistant to the President and National Security Staff Senior Director for Asian Affairs. And then next to him, we have Steve Schwartzman, who is Chairman and CEO and co-founder of Blackstone. This past April, Mr. Schwartzman visited Beijing and founded the Schwartzman Scholars, which is a scholarship program designed to educate the next generation of global leaders by annually funding 200 elite scholars to complete a master's degree at Tsinghua University. It's Mr. Schwartzman. And in 2010, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton appointed Rita Jo Lewis to his right, to Mr. Schwartzman's right, as the Special Representative of Global Intergovernmental Affairs. In this position, Ms. Lewis represented the US government on 5 continents and served as the Obama administration's lead negotiator in executing state and local cooperation agreements with countries in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Europe. And I asked her today, well, currently, what are you doing now? She said, well, I'm running for mayor of DC. So each panelist will speak for 5 minutes or so about their real experience with China and the reasons they're involved. And then after that, I'll do a Q&A, we'll have a conversation. And at the end, I've been told I can't have a Q&A with the general audience, but I may come to students. If you have any questions for these panelists, start thinking about them now. So hopefully I have a little time for a Q&A with the students. So, Mr. Assistant Secretary.
Okay, well, you can call me by my code name, Danny. Well, thanks to all of you, Mona, you especially. I'm happy to be here with Steve and Rita and this group. I'll make full disclosure up front. I am prejudiced. I was working for President Obama, handling the Asia portfolio at the National Security Council when the 100,000 Strong initiative was created. So I put myself firmly in the already supporter camp. As a policy matter, the United States has already a huge commitment in the future of the Asia-Pacific region because we are a Pacific country and our security and our economic destiny is absolutely tied up with the region. Many people call this century the century of the Asia-Pacific with real justice. And 100,000 Strong is a major part of the investment that we have. And China, by virtue of its size, its growth, its potential, is just a huge component of America's future. And investing in not just government-to-government ties, not just business, commercial ties, not just professional and technical ties, but in people-to-people ties is hugely important. And as I said, I'm an absolute believer. Part of the reason that I'm a believer is that I myself started out after college, unfortunately without the benefit of the Schwartzman Scholar Program or the 100,000 Strong, but just with a little bit of wanderlust. Traveling through Asia on my own account, I wound up not in China but in Japan, and eventually stayed there for 3 years, learned to speak the language the old-fashioned way by getting hungry and needing to tell people what I wanted. The key takeaways for me from that experience are many, but among them is this, that we have to, particularly as Americans, we have to understand, we have to learn how the world works, not by watching on TV, not by looking at it through binoculars, but by getting out there and doing things, meeting people, and studying. There's much more to it than studying the language, but studying the language is absolutely essential. For one thing, it provides the vehicle, the instrument for communication. And as a diplomat and a government official, I'm in the communication business, so it matters a lot. But perhaps even more importantly, learning the language gives you a window into the culture, into the thinking and the traditions of another country. And that is essential not only for having a good and productive relationship, building ties with that country, it's also essential for understanding what the areas of convergence and what the areas of divergence are. In my experience as a diplomat, a lot of times we are arguing over things we actually agree on, we just don't know it. A second huge value of learning, studying, and living overseas is, as was the case for me, and I think the case for many others, only when you get some distance from your own country can you understand yourselves, understand where you come from, understand your own culture. It sounds a little bit syrupy maybe, but I became a real patriot after living overseas for a few years, because it helped me understand the parts of my own culture, the parts of my own heritage that were invisible to me before I left because they were all around me. Diplomacy depends on not just being able to communicate, but being able to understand yourself and being able to understand the other guy. The enemy of understanding is ignorance. It's the starting point for prejudice. It's the starting point for misunderstanding. It's the starting point for mistrust. And it's the starting point for conflict. So when I came back from living overseas, I found a job in New York. I worked there for a while. And I had a couple of opportunities. By far and away, the most lucrative one was to go work on Wall Street. And if I'd taken that road, maybe I'd be lucky enough to be working for the Blackstone Group today. But in large part, because of my these two dimensions of my own experience. Number one, living overseas, living in Asia, learning a language, and secondly, having learned so much about the United States, and frankly being concerned that so few Americans were learning Asian languages and were evincing the kind of interest in Asia that I thought was warranted. I passed up that opportunity, instead joined the Foreign Service, joined the State Department, pursued a career in diplomacy, have never looked back and never regretted it for a moment. And I hope some of the students at AU will consider that as a career. But we need diplomats who know China, who speak Chinese, who have experience in the region. That's a given. But we also need lawyers, we need teachers, we need doctors, we need scientists, we need artists, we need journalists. The understanding of Asia and experience with Asia, but particularly in China, is really an essential ingredient, not only for the practice of diplomacy, but across the board. And this experience will not only enrich the work and the lives of the individuals who do it, whatever their line of work, but it will also enrich the disciplines, because we do look at the same issues from a different vantage point, because we do bring different historical, cultural backgrounds to issues and to problem solving. We have a lot to learn from each other. The State Department, for some of those reasons, plays a big role in promoting educational exchanges, and particularly in addition to the 100,000 strong programs like Fulbright and the critical language studies and the Gilman program and so on. And the State Department fund a large number, maybe the largest number of students that go to China. China, of course, sends most of its students here to the United States, and that helps us to bridge gaps. It helps us to overcome barriers, and as I said before, most importantly, it breaks up the stereotypes that are, and the prejudices that are at the root of so many problems. Where we get into problems as a government or in diplomacy is when we make assumptions about what the other guy thinks. We make assumptions about motives and intentions and rationale. Learning to communicate and learning to understand the interests and the thought processes of the Chinese is a critical element in our foreign policy. Secondly, the people-to-people ties are the those are the fasteners. That's what binds countries together. And this is not just nice to do stuff. This is not just feel good stuff. The strongest bulwark against cataclysmic mistakes, the thing that keeps governments from going overboard in one direction or another, are ties between the people. Knowing someone from China makes a difference. Having friendships in China makes a difference. We're not making our national security decisions on the basis of an old graduate school buddy we had at Tsinghua University. But we are, when we get information about what the Chinese government may be doing or may be planning, we are holding that up against a template of our own experiences, of who are the Chinese? What are they all about? What do they care about? And to know the answer to that question, to know that they are like us, to understand Chinese people and Chinese culture, if not Chinese language, is a safety valve against the kind of fundamental mistakes that we simply can't afford. I just came from the consultations on people-to-people exchange meetings, the program, along with Secretary Kerry and with Vice Premier Liu Yandong. There is a reason why people as incredibly busy as the Vice Premier and the Secretary of State invested so much time in this effort. And the reason is because it is very much in our common long-term national security interests. There's also a reason why President Obama has put so much energy and effort into both the Asia-Pacific region and in particular the US-China relationship. It's not that because he lived in Indonesia, he has a romantic attachment or that there's something personal about it. But because he did live in Asia, he does understand the tremendous importance of the region to the United States. This experience has helped him to see the truths and the opportunities, just like the experience of 100,000 Strong or the Schwarzman scholars helps them to understand what Asia is, what China is, and why it really matters to us. I don't want to use up your time, Steve, or your time, Rita, so let me just stop there and we can get more out in questions.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Schwartzman.
Yeah, you can call me Steve as long as you're doing first name. And I'd like to start out and just say that Gary Locke's really done a terrific job in China. I was there a few weeks ago, and we were, sort of speakers on the same program, and he was in front of me, and I was following, and we were talking afterwards, and I knew him when he was here at Commerce, and he's really done a terrific job, and the relationship between the U.S. and China now is probably as good as it's ever been. And President Obama's meetings with President Xi out in California was the right place, right time, handled the right way. As an amateur observing this, tension levels are low and people are working together well. And, so I think, Ambassador Locke gets a good bunch of the credit on that as well. So it's been very successful. Apparently, I'm the only non-government representative on the panel. I don't know what that's saying about the balance of our economy, but nonetheless, I'm here from the private sector. And how did I get here? It's a bit of a mystery, even to me, in some level. Life, for those of you out there who are living it, is a bit of a set of odd series of events that sometimes drive you in places you wouldn't normally go. In my case, it really started when our company called Blackstone was going public, and that was 2007, apparently right before the markets decided that that was the top moment. We were contacted by the representatives of the Chinese government who wanted to make a very large investment in the offering. It wasn't anything we solicited, and so they made that investment. I think they made that investment. Was the first large equity investment made by China since World War II in a private company outside of China. So we basically were chosen for whatever the reasons that the Chinese wanted to do that, which I think had to do about recycling their very large financial reserves as a symbol that they were engaged with the rest of the world. And so as a result of that, I went on the board of Tsinghua University's School of Economics and Management, which was founded by Zhu Rongji, who was a premier and a very well-known premier and successful one in China. So it became more of a place where the establishment, such as it is, gets together. And so I had to look into that, and they unfortunately had to look into me. And what happened with that is they asked me for their 100th anniversary if I would help fund a student exchange. And there was something that happened in 2008 called the financial crisis. So that sort of was engaging me during that period of time. And so I managed not to get, sort of engaged, because people asked me for money for frequency, and so I avoided that one. But 2 years later, they had a new president of the university, and very good guy, President Chen. And so I was living in Europe, and he flew to Europe to ask me to think about this seriously. So I started thinking about student exchange, and did I really care about student exchanges? And it wasn't number one on my list. I started thinking about, what do I care about? What am I concerned about? And what I was concerned about was the fact that on the one hand, China was growing at 2 to 3 times, actually at that point it was 3 times or more, as the developed world. And it didn't look to me like the developed world was going to get all that wonderful. And what tends to happen in a world where you have discretionary income of the middle class not growing for 25 or 30 years, and it's like that pretty much, whether it's Europe or the US, then people have a legitimate right to be frustrated. And the way they take out that frustration is they tend to get angry at somebody. And whether they're getting angry at the financial community or they're getting angry at wealthy people, they're going to get angry at somebody. And it seemed to me just a matter of time before they start getting angry at China, because China is going to be the winner of the forthcoming decades in all probability. And once people start getting irrationally angry or have their own reasons for it, really bad things can happen between countries. You can have trade disputes. You can have economic problems. You can have potential military issues. And you're already seeing some military issues between, territorial issues between China and Japan, China and the Philippines, and there's a lot more to go on that. And so I looked at things and I said, well, what could I do with a problem I think is a high probability problem? How could I get in the way of this and try and ameliorate that? And the idea of taking that situation and say, well, what do we do? And I looked at it and I said, a program like the Rhodes Scholarship Program, which is really a terrific program where I happen to know a lot of people who were Rhodes Scholars, and I guess I kept track of them because I was rejected. And I was rejected for more than the Rhodes. I even tried to go to Cambridge, and that didn't work out. And so I was so interested in those programs. And I said, well, geez, if we use the Rhodes approach, get the best and the brightest, get future leaders, bring them to China and give them a special experience. And the kind of experience I wanted to give them, which is what, since I'm involved, they're going to get, is I wanted them to meet the leaders of China, because not that many people who are non-Chinese really get to do that. I wanted them to travel to different cities with professors, not just do Shanghai and Hong Kong and think they've seen China, because that's a part of China you would find familiar, but that's not all of China. I wanted them to have the experience in their field of study, to get assigned to a mentor who is one of the most famous people in China, who's a great person in their area. So if it happened to be someone who's interested in business, you could see if we can get Jack Ma from Alibaba or one of the famous business people. So you go there once a month. You see how they run their business, if it happens to be business. You get to meet their families, so that this isn't just an academic program. Because what I find in life is the stuff you remember isn't what you study in school. There's a process you learn at school that you don't forget. But the actual knowledge gets obsoleted very quickly. But you remember experiences. You remember the people you met. And I'm like an object lesson in globalization. Unlike the secretary, I wasn't going around, to foreign countries, and my language skills are utterly non-existent. In fact, I got a C at Yale. We had mandatory criteria. I got a C if I promised the head of the French department that if I never took French again, I'd get a C. But if I wanted to take other courses, I'd get the D or F I really deserved. So I happen not to have language skills. But I thought that if we can get people coming and understanding what they're doing. So what we did, just to be quicker about it, we're going to take 200 students a year after they graduate. It's going to be 45% US, 20% Chinese, 35% from the rest of the world. They're going to go to Tsinghua University. They're going to get a master's degree taught in 1 year. I happen to think China's a tough place to live. We're a new program, so a year is better than 2 years. The courses will be taught in English, which reflects my inability to understand other languages. And actually, about 40% of the courses at Tsinghua University are taught in English, not in Chinese, because English is the universal language. That once these students get this kind of experience and they go back to their own countries, their job, as the secretary said, is to be able to interpret for the countries where they live what China's like. I see this when I go to the Middle East. I travel around the world. The opposite. I travel incessantly now. I go everywhere. Our business has 25 offices. It's all over the world, and I sort of, part of my job is to go to all these places, and I learn these things. That what I found when I'm in the Middle East, just as an example, is when you're at a dinner, and they usually have dinners for me with like 25, 30 people. The same people, they're all friends. It's the, sort of the educated group or the top business people. Usually what happens is you discuss events around the world, and somebody will be very critical, for example, of the United States, something we did or didn't do or thought we were doing, and we're misinterpreted. And there's always somebody who puts their hands up, and they say, I went to Georgetown, I went to American University, I went to Harvard, and it doesn't work that way. And I'm sitting there at the table, and however that discussion was trending, it's over, right? And people don't get all excited going the wrong way. So with the Schwarzman Scholars Program, and then I'll end, we're going to have over someone's lifetime 10,000 of these people. And 10,000 people isn't 100,000, but it's 10,000 special people with a special background, special training. And in the internet world, which is not one I grew up in, right? You can keep in touch with that cohort of people. When I went to school, you had a number of friends. You graduated, maybe you kept one or two of them. because it was impossible to keep up. In the new world, this group of 10,000 people will be able to communicate with each other and be a formidable force, basically, for good relations. So we're building a building that'll look like a college at Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Yale. It'll be one of those with the sloping roof as opposed to a glass box. And it's going to be very exciting. So I'm involved now with the academic world by accident in my spare time. And we've got people like the former head of Oxford, Yale, other schools, terrific people, Lou, and who's helping us with curriculum. And we have 3 subcommittees, 17 academics who are like amazing, designing stuff, bringing it to China. We're bringing best practices from the West, which has been completely adopted by President Xi, by all the top people in China. I had no idea that this was going to happen. We've become a symbol of reform of the educational world in China. China wants to have 2 of their universities, I think if I had to guess, it would be Tsinghua and Beidao, in the top 10 in the world in 20 years. Usually when China sets an objective, they sort of get it done. So this is a moment of enormous transformation in China, and we've accidentally stumbled right into the gun sights of this. It's exceptionally exciting and impactful, and I'm happy to be involved, even though this isn't my day job. We're making a lot of change. It's all going to be funded by individuals. We're up to $260 million in 6 months. So I'm like begging, you should all feel pleased that I haven't had a chance to go into the audience because you'd be asked for something. We're going to try and get our way up to about 350
Maybe
million.
you should be in government. You're good. We need you. I just want to make sure, can this side of the room hear? Okay, and then back there? Okay, they're doing something else. They're doing homework. Okay.
I thought they were ready to give. I didn't realize that.
And the 10,000 does contribute to the 100,000 number, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Mona. It's just an honor to be here at American University and be able to talk about this conversation that we're having here today. I will tell you, I remember when Carola was asked to join the State Department by Danny's former colleague, Kurt Campbell, and to talk about 100,000 strong, which was really an idea that Kirk and Secretary Clinton had. And now to be able to look around in this audience and to see how this has grown, it is really just an honor and to be able to be here, and also to be here back at my own alma mater. I got my master's here at American University, so I have to say it's always great to be an American. And to hear you say from the private sector as that partner, and you say, why am I up here on this stage? We all know why you're up here on this stage, because it is really truly about the public-private partnerships that all of us have tried to aspire to achieving while at the State Department that makes programs like this really come alive and to have an impact on the lives of young people. I was asked to be on this panel this afternoon to do a couple of things. I think it was to really talk about the fact of how does some national corporation efforts that I led at the State Department have an impact on what is being done around the country here in the United States and in China with state and local officials. When I was asked to serve as the special representative for global intergovernmental affairs, it was all about first having to define for even my colleagues what that meant. I mean, I think everybody understood the whole intergovernmental relationship, but when you start talking about doing it at the U.S. State Department, that takes on a different significance. And when, in fact, coming into the Obama administration early in the first term, President Obama set the guiding principle that we were going to be in an era of engagement. And in that era of engagement, it was to look for any type of area, any type of industry, any type of sector, any groups of people, any people in communities to begin to have an impact on anything that we were doing. And for Secretary Clinton, who came in with that same premise, it was the fact that, our diplomacy efforts, whereas they are very large, they're still done by a very, very small group of people. And so in this era of engagement, we had to take a step back. And if you noticed that when she first came in, one of the first things she went about was talking about the different kinds of ambassadors and diplomats that she wanted to come in over different areas. And so you all know that she first, of course, started out talking about bringing women and giving women a seat at the table. I will tell you that when she asked me to come into the State Department, it was all around the area of state and local officials. Now, having been married to a governor, having been a United States senator, she truly understood the work that state and local officials did. I would tell you, one of the things that we always like to say in the State Department, when you start talking about state and local relations, people can get a little nervous, because our diplomacy, our foreign policy, of course, and we made it very, very clear, was always to be done at the nation-to-nation level. But for decades and for years, for many of you who have sat around in this room, we know that the people-people relationship and the ties that we all have is where the strength of our relationships have always come about. We've always known, too, that our leaders at the state and local level, so anything below the federal government, the central government, meaning who is an elected official, whether it is a governor, a mayor, a county executive, or legislator, are individuals who, because of the diaspora community in their individual U.S. communities, were always the driving force for development of relationships abroad. And so to be able to come into the U.S. State Department at that time, almost 4 years ago, and to see this kind of effort has mushroomed and grown, I believe is a true testament to a lot of the work that we've done. Because at the state and local level, it was all about how we could broaden and deepen our overall relationships. Because we know that whether it is from, whether you're working in California, or whether you want relationships here in Georgia or in Maryland, with those abroad, it's about, you got to decide who's are the people that's going to be doing those relationships and who can be the driver for those. I would tell you, in the era of engagement, it was one of the highlights was to develop the Memorandum of Understanding for the U.S.-China Subnational Initiative. And so what I would tell people all the time is that, an agreement can be just another agreement. But someone has to implement that. And the implementing forces behind those relationships that we were able to sign with countries like China was our governors, was our mayors, was our county executives. And the reason being is that in all of our communities, it doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or whether you're in China or wherever you are around the world, the governor, the party secretary, the chief minister, they are the drivers of their own economy. And so it would not matter whether I was talking in the United States to a local leader or whether I was traveling throughout China, and Steve is absolutely right. It's not just about going to Beijing and going to Shanghai. It's really about what is going on throughout China. That's where it is dynamic. And what we would like to say when I was traveling, it's not just about coming to California or coming to New York or coming to Washington, D.C. The United States also is one big country. And in that largesse, there are relationships that can be developed across the board. And so we saw the interest at the national level between the national leaders in China as well as the leaders here in the United States at our State Department, wanting to formalize these kinds of relationships like they had never ever been done before. Because normally people will see that, these city-to-city or these state-to-state relationships were really about sister-city relationships. And people would say, okay, well, the sister-city relationship can grow or it can wane depending on whoever is the driver behind that. What we were doing at the State Department was to say that those individuals who are the leaders of their economies in those particular communities, whether you're in the United States or whether you're in China, they are the ones who have the ability to drive relationships like no other. And in driving the relationships, we would start out with conversations in several particular areas. It was always about a job. United States governors and mayors were about the business of wanting to make sure that the citizens that they serve was how could they go about creating jobs if they were going to be doing relationships abroad. If I was traveling in China or anywhere else around the world, those leaders also started with that same premise. So they wanted to engage in an economic relationship. They wanted to engage in a relationship that was going to be not only, it was going to be mutually beneficial, not just for them as leaders, but mutually beneficial for the citizens that they were going to be able to serve. The educational arena was also a very key driver of the understanding, knowing that in our states and in our localities, that our governors have a great deal to do, especially with our state institutions, but also because of the role that they play they have a great deal to do with the private institutions because of the way government can leverage any type of resources for them. At the county and the city level, oftentimes the mayor, the county executive, is over the community colleges. And I will tell you that as we were traveling throughout the cities in China, it was not just about how you could get a 4-year education or a degree. It was also about vocational and technical educational, because the skills that people have to have for thousands and hundreds of thousands of people vary, because it's all still leading back to one thing. How are you going to get a job? How are you going to be a productive citizen? How are you going to have impact in your community? So I would tell you that when 100,000 Strong was being developed, and to see where it is right now, we have been successful in working with organizations like the Chinese Friendship for Foreign Countries, and working with their counterparts here in the United States, like the National Governors Association, working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, working with the national state legislators, because they became our implementing partners for us to be able to go to our individual leaders to talk to them about the fact that we needed to work with them and leverage whatever resources they would have to help us to be able to reach out to the thousands of young people that we wanted to be able to have in these kinds of programs. And so one of the things that we have seen is, through these subnational relationships, no one ever forgets that our foreign policy is really between the principles of our central and our national government. But the relationships that is developed at that state and local level endures forever. And I will give you one example before turning it back over to Ms. Locke. In 1985, when the current president of China was a provincial leader, he went to Iowa. And when he went to Iowa, he developed such a great relationship with not only the people in Iowa, but also the leaders in Iowa. And here we look at, years later, that the current president of China who was the provincial leader then in 1985, is now the president of China. And one of the first things he did when he came to the United States as the vice president was he wanted to go back to Iowa. He wanted to engage with Governor Branstad and the citizens in Iowa. And when he did that, not only as he was on his tour and showing the continued commitment that where he understood the relationships that are at the state and local level and with state and local leaders, when he went to California, it was very important for him to not only, as we were able to bring governors from around the country to engage with him in California, but also to be able to engage with people like Governor Brown. Governor Brown, it took us over 2 years working with him, and when he decided to go to China over these few months ago, it was very clear that between what was taking place in California and that relationship that took us to build over 2 years of working with his economic team and working with the private sector, was also shortened, I believe, by the work that was done way back in 1985 by the citizens in Iowa and the leaders in Iowa. When the president of China met with the governor of Iowa, Governor Branstad, he was able to sign over $1 billion worth of business, $1 billion worth of economic opportunity that was going to be going not just in one direction, but it was a two-way street. And it was with a state that they were signing relationships around agriculture, they were signing relationships around education, and around issues around the environment. The same thing happened a few short months ago when the Governor Brown went to California. He signed himself over $1 billion worth of business in China with his colleagues that he had met over this 2-year period that we were engaging with him. So whether it is at the state level or whether it is from that national level of having a president of a country, whereas in our country, President Obama and Secretary Clinton and now Secretary Kerry truly values the relationship. Secretary Kerry had been a former lieutenant governor himself. He truly understands the relationships at the state and local level. It was very exciting to be able to work with Ambassador Huntsman, who was a governor, and then to be able to work with Ambassador Locke, who also was a governor. So the stage had already been set for decades for this type of work. And so being able to bring it to the forefront, to be able to sign these types of agreements, but not just another piece of paper, but to be able to sign work that we could see the fruit of the labor that went directly, not just to the United States or to China as a country, but went directly to the people and the citizens of the community of which those leaders served in. And so all of the work, as I started out saying, is that, it started out at, we know there's nothing to be nervous about when you start doing this kind of work. It is to be embraced. And so the work of the 100,000 Strong, I believe, took on that same type of engagement, took on that same type of embracing. And that's why I think we're all sitting here today to see the good works and to celebrate that this is some work that is going to continue to go on, and to know that our leaders at the state and local level are full partners in this work, and we're very excited to be here to talk about that.
Okay, great. So in anticipation of Secretary Kerry's visit, we have about 5 minutes left for this short panel. Let's do a quick round robin, very quick answers. Question I have for you: Americans all often hold the view that how we do things is the right way to do things, whether it's in regards to human rights, whether it's in regard to our legal system, freedom of speech. How do we overcome this challenge with China?
Well,
in 1 minute.
yeah. The first order of business in tackling these areas of potential disagreement is to differentiate between what are universal human values, what are universal guiding principles that tells us what we have in common, versus what is our cultural heritage, our political inheritance, and the unique attributes of our country that shape our perspective. When we can agree on on the universal principles, that everybody in every country wants safety for their citizens, wants opportunity, wants jobs, and wants education for their kids, we have a starting point. The next step then are the questions about how we approach that, how we go about it. So the ability to look at yourself and to listen to the other person, that ability is the essential ingredient to being able to address these potential areas of difference. I think that the experience that people gain, not just on-the-job training, but in their youth, whether it's through a private scholarship program or through its 100,000 Strong, sets the stage for that kind of constructive engagement.
Thank you. Steve?
I think you have to look at this type of issue on a much broader basis than China and the U.S. As you go around the world, there are all kinds of different forms of governments and cultural norms and what we would regard are freedoms or constraints on different types of activities. And as I look at that, these societies each somehow manage to function on their own. And over time, these are not rigid types of things. There's change. And when you look at what will happen in China. It's anybody's estimate on any one of these individual issues of how they evolve. But part of the advantage of having these types of exchanges is that when you bring people from one culture to another, and they have to experience it, they have to see what it's like. As the secretary says, it's self-defining. Makes you value certain things higher. But your ability to impact other cultures by sharing with them how you might do things, really makes a difference over time. And the fact that there are 12 times the number of Chinese coming to the United States as go the other way tells you that the probability is that over time, with a large number of people, particularly they're very well-educated people, coming to the United States, is going to have an impact longer term on the way they see the world as well, in addition to like a lot of other global phenomena. So that's my minute.
Thank you, Steve.
When I started talking about state and local leaders, it's always going to the economic issue. It always went to the education. Education was always a high priority. And when we were talking about the coming together, the conversation first has to start out with developing of the relationship. And I think that when we all started into this work, when people are out meeting and talking with each other, and diplomats are talking with each other, and just the common average person talking with each other, it always starts around trust and mutual understanding and respect. And I think from an American standpoint, we're charging ahead and ready to sign, whereas the Chinese are developing a relationship. I saw over the 4 years that we were working with state and local leaders that we were able to let them know that you got to first start with the relationship. That's where it all begins. And when you start talking about trust and understanding and mutual respect, all of the same values that we all share, we could always get to the goal that we wanted to go. Because what we would always like to say is that anybody could be a diplomat. All you had to do was be able to press send. And now young people in the tech-savvy world that we all live in, that anybody can be involved, can be a diplomat. And so with those guiding principles, if we just take a step back and make sure that that's the foundation of how we build any of our relationship, that the educational experiences that any of us would have, not just as students, but also whether it's faculty and researchers and individual administrators, is all so valuable, because it is the entire continuum of the relationship in our education system that is going to be pushing forward these relationships that's going to last forever.
Okay, and can I keep going? No, I have to wrap up. Okay, according to Open Doors report, also, currently 235,000 Chinese came to the US to study this last year, and there were about 15,000 Americans that went to China. So there's a lot of work to do. So I thank all of our panelists today for their insightful thoughts on this relationship. And again, thank you to 100,000 Strong for everything they're doing to better this bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
One question.
If once again I could ask for your patience as we await Secretary Kerry and Madam Liu. We understand they're on their way, and we will bring them up to the stage as soon as they arrive. If I could have everyone move as far down as possible to leave the space over by the doors here free. Thank you.
Is he coming now? Not quite. I just want to get him and try to find Cassie.
Thank you again for your patience. We will be starting soon, but I just wanted to make an announcement that if you are going to the USIP event, which is invitation only, there will be a bus in the parking lot directly diagonal from the SIS building across Nebraska Avenue immediately after the program. Thank you.
I'll pretend to be, no. Sure, hold that.
Sure it's in there?
I could ask everyone to take their seats, we're going to get started with the keynote addresses. We are still waiting for Secretary Kerry's arrival from the White House, but we're very honored to have the Vice Premier of China, Madam Liu Yandong, here with us, and we will get started in a moment. So please take your seats. Thank you.
On behalf of American University, we are honored to host the United States Secretary of State John Kerry and China's Vice Premier Liu Yandong. Would you please join me in welcoming Madam Liu?
好，尊敬的卡罗里主席啊，女士们、先生们，各位朋友们，大家下午好。我是因为我下面呢还有一个到和平研究所啊有一个演讲啊，另外今天晚上呢我就要离开华盛顿呢，坐火车要到这个纽约去，是吧？所以我就是只能提前来讲一讲。这个都有这个我非常高兴啊，能够来参加美国10万强基金会的首届年会。自奥巴马总统呢首次访华宣布啊，实施10万强这个计划4年的时间，已经推动了6万8千名啊美国的青年人来华呢留学啊交流，成为中美人文交流大树上的一枚硕果。那么基金会的成立，也为进一步的落实10万强的计划，深化两国人文交流呢，探索了一条新途径，啊，增添了一股新动力。我对各位有识之士的富有远见的行动表示钦佩，对大家呢为推进中美人文交流所做出的贡献啊，也表示感谢。如今呢，在中国的大学的校园里，我们能遇到啊越来越多的10万强计划的留学生，他们的进步啊实在是令人赞叹。他们和中国的青年一道啊，成为啊增进两国人民友谊的 生力军，在他们的身上我看到了青年的无限活力，感受到了人文交流的无穷魅力。刚才我在跟各位在谈的时候也谈到了，28年前当时一位年轻的县委书记到美国来访，来谈这个玉米的项目，后来到了埃瓦尔州，在这个小镇上呢住了2天。28年之后，在去年，后来他就是我们现在中国的国家主席习近平先生，在去年访美呢，他又重返了这个小镇，和老朋友们一起欢聚，当时外交部原来准备是让州长和外交部的这些官员坐在中间，他说你们都坐到后面，我和我的老朋友一起围着炉子，我们一起来谈，这就说明青年之间的这种交流对于国家的关系这个有何等重要的意义。我这次访美是为了落实两国元首的重要的共识，举行了两国政府换届之后第一轮的人文交流高层磋商，主题呢就是青年与创新。双方呢已经宣布将在2014年深入地开展中美的青年的政治家、科学家、艺术家在各个领域的青年人互访的项目，而且要继续实施中美学生领袖的交流项目，启动中美青年企业家的社会创新的项目，这样为两国的青年交流呢开辟更加广阔的空间。女士们、先生们，友谊的种子最容易在青年的心灵里生根发芽。正是越来越多的青年融入到人文交流的大潮才使中美的友谊能够焕发如此旺盛的生机和活力。我们应当从中美关系大局出发，顺应时代的潮流，来促进两国青年的相知相识和相交，互尊互信，携手呢共创中美新型大国关系这样一个美好的未来。所以我想在今后呢，在青年交流方面，我想第一是要着眼未来，把青年的交流要摆在更加突出的位置，拓展更加宽广的渠道，搭建多形式、多层次的交流平台。二是要加强引领，要鼓励更多的青年到对方的国家学习交流。中国政府呢，鼓励中国的青年出国呢这个留学交流。就是中国改革开放35年来一共有将近300万的中国青年呢出国留学，其中呢接近一半是到美国来留学的。所以我觉得今后还希望更多的美国青年呢到中国去留学。所以我们这个第三就是要汇聚力量让更多的有识之士能够支持参与中美的人文交流。我想中美友好的根基在民众，希望在青年。我注意到今天的会议材料上有一句非常响亮的口号就是投资中美关系，一个学生一份力量。我想呢，投资青年就是投资未来。我呼吁所有关心中美关系、关心青年的各界人士，能够群策群力，使中美友好能够后继有人、薪火相传。我相信呢历史一定会证明，我们今天为两国青年交流所做的努力，必将成为未来中美关系最宝贵的财富。谢谢大家。